All of this speaks to the need for all of us to care about the future of this community in a way where we are smart and we are responsible and we are strategic when it comes to budgeting. And I think you will see us doing that during this budget cycle.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Inside Austin's Agenda. I'm your host, Grace Reeder. You just heard from Austin Mayor Kirk Watson there. Today at a luncheon, he made an announcement that he'd like to change the way the city of Austin does its budget process because of the political climate we're in right now and cuts that are coming from the state and in particular the federal government. This was that luncheon that I'm referring. We're doing our show a little bit differently today. Today, instead of having a guest in here with me live, I had the chance to sit down with Austin Mayor Kirk Watson in advance of that announcement to talk through what his plans are. Take a listen. First and foremost, thank you for doing this.
My
I appreciate
pleasure.
it
Thank
as
you.
always. Let's talk a little bit about budget and what you're going to announce tomorrow. Talk a little bit about kind of what your announcement is, what your hopes are for tomorrow.
Well, what I'm going to talk about tomorrow is that Austin is a big city, and we have big city needs. And so it's going to be important for us to make sure that we focus on our finances in a way that is mature and methodical, and we put in a meaningful way, and we have processes that are meaningful, and that requires us to pay attention to what's going on around us. For example, a lot of what's happening in Washington D.C. can have a very significant impact on what it is that we're trying to do in Austin. I mean, people hear about the grants and whether grants are going to continue to come our way, how those are going to impact us. But there are things beyond that as well. I mean, there's a big discussion in Congress right now over budget reconciliation. And there's some that are talking about federal tax cuts, but in order to do those federal tax cuts, they have to find the money to reconcile that. Well, one of the ways they're talking about doing that is doing away with the exemption from federal taxation of municipal bonds. So if you do away with that exemption, on paper at least, it says, well, we did away with the exemption, so that must mean more revenue, and that will offset. Well, it would be devastating to cities. A couple of reasons. So just to give you an example, we think that statewide what that would do is it would probably increase local taxes about $471 a person. Well, if you look at what the Senate's doing right now, the Texas Senate, they're talking about a tax break that would be about $494. So in other words, basically all of that would be offset by doing away with it. In addition, it would cause real problems for some of our programs and projects. The airport's a good example. Our chief financial officer here at the city says that for every $100 million of issuance of municipal bonds, it would add about $22 million. So when you think of the airport as a really good example, what that would do is we would have to start looking, I think, at probably what we cut from this major airport expansion that we so desperately and badly need, or we'd have to figure out how you're going to charge the airlines more or customers more. So there's things going on in DC that we sometimes don't even think about that will make a difference. We're running the ARPA money, the relief money that we had coming to the city is going away. Its time is up. A lot of that money was it was meant for one-time spending, but it was used for ongoing expenditures. We need to figure out how we're going to deal with those. Or even in some instances where it paid for a specific capital activity, but it created ongoing expenditures. A good example of that is permanent supportive housing for our homeless. But you got to have the services to be able to keep people in permanent supportive housing. And then we have, the revenue cap that was passed by the legislature. We have a lot of things that we need to be paying attention to. And what I'm announcing and encouraging for people to do is let's do this in a mature way. Otherwise, we're going to see ourselves in trouble, I think, and see deterioration of some of the things that we need for our quality of life.
What do you mean by mature way?
Well, I think one of the things is we do it in a methodical way. And by that I mean we take into account the holistic. So I'll give a good example. There was some discussion of having a bond election in 2024. Well, I did not favor that because I didn't want it to be a single shot bond election. And I wanted it to be one that was comprehensive so we could look at all of our needs holistically and at the same time. I don't want us to get into a habit of we see something we want, somebody is advocating for that, so that what we do is we say, okay, let's go do that on any given week. We need to look at it as a whole. In addition to that, the way bond elections had been done prior to my getting here 2 years ago was it just felt like we had a bond election pretty much any time you could have an election. And there weren't always the plans done in advance of that. Part of the reason I wanted it to be in 2026 is it would allow the work to go into it on the front end, because what then happens if you don't is you have the bond election, you create the expectations, but then the work goes into how you will spend that money. And by that time, you've added time, you've added cost, you've added expense, and you're not getting what you want. So a mature way of doing that is do it on the front end. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
So what will the budget process look like then if it's not, we've passed a resolution, we want to look at a climate bond, we've passed a resolution, we want to prioritize homelessness. How does this all happen in one?
Well, a couple of things. One is we need to make sure that the public is fully aware of how the general fund budget actually operates. We have a budget in Austin that's around $6 billion. And I posted the other day something about the budget, and somebody immediately posted something in response. And they maybe unfortunately didn't understand that they were talking about things that other cities don't necessarily have. Other cities don't necessarily own their own electric utility or their own airport, and that adds. Our general fund budget is about a quarter of that. It's about $1.4 billion, and that $1.4 billion is what pays for things like police, fire, EMS, parks, libraries. But when you look at that budget, and this is a key part of about making sure we all are playing with the same numbers and understand, 100% of the property tax dollars that you pay in the city of Austin goes to public safety. It goes to police, fire, and EMS. But that doesn't pay for all of the police, fire, and EMS. It requires another 65.5% of our sales tax revenue. So when you stop and think about it, pretty much all of the taxes collected as revenue pay for public safety. And then it's fees and fines and transfers and that kind of thing that pay for everything else we want. The next part of that is making sure that we're looking at it as a whole, and that we don't do just one-offs, because the one-off will then impact what we're able to do with the full budget. And what you're going to, I think, see is the Audit and Finance Committee, which I now chair. In January, I became chair of the Audit and Finance Committee. What we're going to do is again, what I would call a mature, methodical process of looking at all of those kinds of questions, including the ARPA money that's going away. One of the questions I have is, what would our tax rate have been? What would our tax rate have been if we paid for all of those things out of taxes as opposed to having that ARPA money? I think that will help us in looking at whether or not the revenue cap of 3.5%, what role it's actually played. I'm going to also ask questions about how much of the money was one time, was meant to be one time, but was actually spent on ongoing expenses, so that we have all of that data out in front of us as we go into this budget process. And I think that'll make it a more robust discussion.
Why the emphasis on this now?
Well, because I feel strongly that we have real needs in the city, and we have limitations on what we're able to do in that regard. I don't think it's too early to start the budget process. We have a system that has been a kind of a traditional system with regard to the budget, but I want to start talking about it now because I want us to all be looking at it now, because I think I don't want to wait till we get into the heat of the budget process and then there's not time to do these things. When I was running for re-election, that was one of the things that I talked about. The stability in local government is very important right now, and making sure that we can pay for the services that provide the quality of life. And this is a key part of that. We also have threats to that. I've mentioned what is going on in Washington, D.C. You know, there's talks of what would happen at the state capitol with regard to local budgeting. So there's not a better time to be talking about it than right now to get ahead. And frankly, there will be questions people will have that I want to make sure we have the time to get them the answers.
For the lays person who doesn't have time to follow city council amendments that come during budget, who doesn't have time to sit through the budget cycle, what is this going to look like at the end of the day for your average Austinite?
Well, what I hope it looks like, it will be kind of that's a broad question that I'll give a broad answer to, but what I hope it looks like is that we have a renewed focus on the details of what we need to do to make sure this big city that we now live in is meeting its big city needs. And there's two things I'd say about that. One is the really good news in Austin, Texas, is that most of our big challenges are a result of success. We have a lot of people that are here and a lot of people that want to be here, and we're not managing decay as a general rule. But if we don't manage that success well, and we don't do it in a methodical, mature way, one of the things that I think will happen is we'll start seeing deterioration. In fact, probably some would point out to me that we may already be seeing some of that. The roads are bumpier than they ought to be, or we don't have enough parkland, or we're not keeping up our parks, or our city's not as clean as we would like. What I want to do is get us on a track where we're able to address those needs. And so what the average person, that they may not see because they may not read the budget, but what they will see is a managed process that is stable and that helps us get to where we will be able to meet those needs. And then if we bring to them something they need to vote on, they can have the confidence that we've thought about it, and it's a comprehensive way of setting us on the right path for the next X number of years.
Do you anticipate that with what's happening at the federal level and the state level that it may be that Austin needs to bring a vote to voters?
Well, certainly we're looking at having a bond package in 2026. And I like the way the Bond Advisory Task Force has said, let's do this in 2026. And they're looking at that in a comprehensive way because we need it to be comprehensive. It needs to, we've got everything from drainage to parks, right? But that being said, I think everyone should anticipate we will have a bond election in November of 2026. And I'm for doing that. We have needs that I don't think we can put off. And that's, in fact, the resolution that I was working on when we did this said no later than 2026. I want us to be prepared for that, and I want us to have done this process in such a way that the voters can have confidence. With regard to any other election, such as a tax ratification election or something of that nature, I think it's too early to say on that. That's what I'm saying when I say let's have a thoughtful, mature, methodical process before we make those kinds of decisions. But again, I want us to do it in that way so that if I go to the voters and we say to the voters, we think we need this, here's what it will pay for, but here's why you can have confidence in that. Here's the process we followed.
So is it safe to say that at a time where we're seeing at the federal level, especially with the Department of Government Efficiency, people are talking a lot about how the government's spending their money, that you're trying to bring people the receipts? Is that a fair way to say this?
Well, yeah, I think the way I would say it is, I think in a time of chaotic approaches to government, I think local government needs to show how we can work without the chaos. We can work in with a process that will show people what we're doing, and we'll show people why we're doing it.
You have the benefit of being in the Conference of Mayors and seeing what other cities are doing. What have your conversations been about this type of thing with other mayors, and what have you taken away from that?
Well, the Conference of Mayors is great in that regard, and I get to be part of a leadership group that where I get to meet with other mayors more routinely than even the regular meetings of the Conference of Mayors. So I do get that opportunity, and mayors are frankly worried about some of the really quick and sometimes haphazard approach to things. The example I gave you earlier about dealing with the tax exemption on municipal bonds. In other words, in order to cut some people's taxes at the federal level, they're probably going to increase, if they do that, they would be increasing the taxes pretty much for everybody at the local level. So those kinds of things we want, and we're advocating for them to listen to the impact that it has at the local level, because that's where a lot of the services are provided. That's where the parks are. That's where the roads are kept up. That's where the health care is provided. That's where you ask us, you're not providing the help for homelessness in the way that we need. That's where the help is going to come, is going to be at the local level. So help us do that by not doing things that create, I'll call them unintended consequences, but certainly negative consequences.
Are there any cuts that are being made with staff or anything that the city of Austin might actually be able to capitalize on?
Well, it's a really good question, and one that we're paying close attention to. In fact, we have a specific program we're putting into place. You know, at any given point in time, in any year, we're probably looking to hire around 2,400 people with a staff of about 16,000. And when I first got here in January of 23, you may remember we really pushed on why do we have so many vacancies. And we created a program at that point in time to focus on how we fill those vacancies so that the services can be provided the way our public expects and demands. This may we may have an opportunity here in that so many federal employees are being let go. And so what we're going to do is rejuvenate that program we had back in 2023 with a focus on federal employees. And in fact, in the first part of April, we're going to have an event where we focus it in that regard. It's interesting. It looks like the statistic that I've been given is that about 80% of the people that will lose their federal positions will be people that are outside of Washington, D.C. And my guess is of that other 20%, a bunch of them may want to go home. So we're focusing on that. You've got people that have already indicated by what they've chosen to do and now have lost their jobs, that they are people that care about public service. And that's who we're looking for, the kind of people we're looking for. And of course, we value public servants, and so it's an opportunity that I think we're going to take it. Well, not I think we are going to take advantage of.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Inside Austin's Agenda. A reminder that we air every other Wednesday afternoon. We'll see you next time.